Well, he has a book about three watches?
Well, you know, it's about the whole thing, not
So
specifically.
it mentions
that.
watches in there? And,
Yeah. So he said he was going to give me the book.
well, don't want to forget it, because I sure would like to get that.
And after the war, well, we skipped from Italy back to Regensburg, back to Germany. East and West Germany, 152. It's Regensburg. At the end of the war, right at the end of the war, Skorzeny was captured by the same outfit that I had been with and had left and gone down to Regensburg. He was captured in Stuttgart. Stuttgart, right here. But he was eventually brought to Regensburg, to a prison camp in Regensburg. And part of our job was to get as close to various Nazi leaders as possible. So we had a man go into we put a man in the Regensburg prison in the same area that Skorzeny was in, and he got very well acquainted with him, to the point where Skorzeny tried to arrange a deal whereby he could escape from there and eventually get to South America. And as identification, Skorzeny gave this man the watches, the three watches that Mussolini had given him. So as a result of that, we went through the escape route, through part of the escape route down to Munich and Bad over to Bad Ischl in Austria. And that's where Skorzeny's wife lived. And she gave the group additional material to try and set up this escape for Skorzeny into South America. So the whole thing was arranged, but then the American headquarters decided not to do it, and that ended that escapade.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, the whole thing was arranged for his escape?
Yeah, you know, we had everything set.
Well, what happened to him then once he
But,
didn't
you know,
use it?
peculiar thing, I don't know whether you have been reading recently about that fellow they just took back to France, the
Oh, yeah. I know which one.
from Lyon, France.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you've read the whole thing, the CIC was directly involved
Uh-huh.
in working with him in Germany. The Stuttgart office, they named Chris Cole, whom I worked with. They named Jimmy Ratliff, whom I worked with. They named Earl Browning, whom I worked with.
They didn't name you, though, huh?
Well, I wasn't, this happened, that particular thing started developing right after I left.
Oh.
So that, but it named all the, but they did exactly there, after they used this fellow, and I can't think of his name, they used him in Germany for a while, And then they put him through the escape route down into South America, just what we had planned initially. And of course, at this point, 20 years, 30 years later, they're blaming the CIC for complicity and for misleading the French. The French wanted this fellow badly, even back then, in 1948 and 49. And what the paper says, that the CIC was lying to him about where he was or what he was doing.
How did you end up with a watch? Just of the 3 watches, the identification, just happened to forget to turn it in, basically.
When the whole thing blew up, everything, all of the jewels and everything else were returned, except the watch.
Just forgot about it.
You have
Well, whatever happened to Mussolini?
They finally, at the end of the war, that was a rather gruesome thing. They hung him, the Italians,
Oh, they did?
hung him by his heels in the middle of a public square.
Until blood rushed to his head and killed him? Is that how that works?
I don't know how,
I
but,
imagine,
they wanted
So he just hid?
the biggest disgrace, they wanted him disgraced as badly as possible. So they hung him by his heels.
why not hang him by his head?
Well,
That'd be too fast.
what is it, what's the deal with the 3 watches now? I mean, they mention it, I mean, is it a big deal for, they still remember them? I mean, if they wrote it in the book.
It's been written about. Skorzeny has a book himself.
Is he still,
in which he
is he
mentioned-
still alive?
Oh yeah, he's
Skorzeny's?
living in Spain.
And so he's wondering where his watches are.
Yeah, and if you tell anybody, he'll probably come looking for them. That's why I said you're not going to publish this.
No. Yeah, I would imagine that would be
You
pretty
would,
important to
sure.
him, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, he's mentioned it.
Who has the watches?
They're just
I don't
tucked
know.
safely away.
That's history, David.
Yeah.
Well, how old is he, Skorzeny?
Hmm?
How old is he now?
He must be over 70. But I understand he's very wealthy and living a life of ease in Spain. He was in he got eventually to South America. He wasn't considered a war criminal, not in the sense of these fellows that ran the concentration camps. He was a fine intelligence operative.
Well, maybe he'd be worth making a deal on the watch for
One
about
of the finest,
$1 million.
even the English will admit that he was one of the best operatives. When I mentioned that little town of Dinant in France, well, that was during the Battle of the Bulge that we went through Dinant to a little town below that, which doesn't show on the map. And the night, Christmas night, would be Christmas of 44, Christmas Eve. We drove through the town of Dinant, and the German advance, that was the Battle of the Bulge period. The German advance was right on the other side of the river at that point. That's the Namur. No, not Namur. Whatever that river is, comes right down through the center of Dinant. We were on this side of the river, and the Germans were on the other. At that point, Skorzeny had equipped certain special forces in American uniforms, and they were infiltrating everywhere in that area. And our mission at this little town below Dinant was to screen everybody that there was a river that came down, and there was a bridge, and then the river came around and back again. I guess reverse order. It came down and back. But there were 2 bridges. And at that point, we were working with the British too, but there were 6 Americans in the group and 6 or 8 British in the group at that point. And that was our mission at that point, was to screen everybody that came across those 2 bridges. But that was one of Skorzeny's accomplishments. He accomplished more things during the war. He was really an extremely capable guy.